Beneath a pale desert sky, a clay tablet lies half buried in dust, its symbols pressed into the earth like a memory that refused to fade. You are here, traveller not by chance, but because some questions echo across time until the moment you're ready to hear them. Tonight those echoes rise from ancient Sumer, from records that speak not of beginnings but of departure. What if the oldest civilization on Earth did not record the arrival of its gods but their exit? Sumerian tablets describe a precise moment around 1950 BC, when temple rituals stopped across an entire region all at once without war or collapse. Offering tables were left untouched, tools abandoned mid-use as if a signal had been given and obeyed everywhere. It is a 1 in thousands kind of coincidence, the kind science hesitates to ignore. Imagine a final light lifting from the horizon, then vanishing into a silent sky. Stay with me, and let us follow the quiet where history ends and mystery begins. A pale wind moves across the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, lifting dust that has waited thousands of years for this moment. Somewhere beneath that dust, a clay tablet rests in silence, its symbols pressed by hands that understood time as something wide and patient, not urgent. You are here, traveller, not because you searched for this story, but because it arrived when your mind was ready to receive it. There are nights when the universe seems to lean closer, and tonight is one of them. I imagine the first scholars who uncovered those tablets at Nippur in the late 19th century brushing soil away under the sun, unaware that they were touching the closing chapter of something far older than history itself. The text did not speak of creation nor conquest nor divine punishment. They spoke of departure, calmly, methodically, as if the leaving of the Anunnaki was not a mythic drama, but a scheduled event. In science, this tone is familiar. It is the language of reports of final entries of missions concluded when objectives have been met. What unsettles me is not what the tablets say, but how they say it. There is no grief in the words, no panic, only the quiet certainty that a cycle had ended. Around 1950 BCE ritual life across Sumer stops almost at once. Archaeology records this pause like a flat line on an instrument readout. Offering tables remain set. Tools are left mid-use. Temples are not destroyed or abandoned through chaos. They are sealed, preserved, as if time itself was asked to wait. Gravity remembers these absences. Stone remembers where hands once were. I have spent long nights alone with instruments watching data accumulate grain by grain, learning that silence is often the most meaningful signal of all. In physics, absence can speak louder than presence. A missing pulse, a vanished emission line, a sudden stillness where activity once thrived. The Sumerian silence feels like that. Not decay, but withdrawal. Not collapse, but distance. Perhaps the Anunnaki did not disappear in fire or catastrophe. Perhaps they stepped back, allowing the system to evolve without direct interference. The tablets describe councils, deliberations, final ceremonies carried out with precision. This is not mythology shaped by poetry. It feels closer to administration, to planning across scales that exceed a single lifetime. When I think of erosion, I think of time thinking slowly. When I think of radiation, I think of whispers that last longer than empires. The Anunnaki texts seem written from that same perspective where centuries are brief and millennia are manageable. Humanity in this view was not abandoned. It was released. What if the departure was an experiment? In astronomy, systems behave differently once observation changes. Remove a stabilizing force and new patterns emerge. Perhaps the Anunnaki were testing whether human civilization could sustain itself without guidance. The sudden quiet in the temples may mark the moment supervision ended. From that point on, humanity would learn through error, adaptation, and memory. The ruins we study today may be the echoes of that decision frozen in stone. Late at night, when my maps gather dust and the world outside grows still, I imagine the final rituals at Eridu and Nippur. Not dramatic, not loud, just careful arrangements of objects' chambers sealed with intention knowledge, placed underground like seeds waiting for another season. Archaeology confirms this deliberate care. These sites were not looted or burned, they were closed. This is not how abandonment looks. This is how waiting looks. Cosmic processes follow similar rhythms. Stars exhaust their fuel and dim without spectacle. Orbits decay according to equations written long before we notice them shifting. The Sumerian records speak of appointed cycles of timing aligned with the sky. Modern astronomy tells us that certain celestial patterns repeat only once every few thousand years. Rare alignments, predictable, but infrequent. When I learned this, I stopped asking whether the scribes were wrong and started asking what clocks they were using. There is a quiet humility that comes with studying the universe long enough. You begin to accept that some answers arrive slowly and others never arrive at all. I have watched signals fade into noise light that flickered once and never returned. Science teaches patience. It teaches restraint. The Anunnaki withdrawal belongs to that same category of mysteries that sit between evidence and interpretation, where certainty dissolves into possibility. Perhaps the most unsettling thought is not that something ancient left, but that it did so intentionally, leaving behind systems, patterns, and thresholds, the temples that fell silent, the calendars that continued to track the sky, the myths that softened into ritual and then into memory. Dust becomes leftover chronology, ruins become frozen echoes. Civilization continues unaware that it is walking through the long shadow of a decision made before recorded history truly began. Tonight, as you listen, allow yourself to rest inside that uncertainty. You are not lost in space. You are part of it. The dust beneath ancient temples and the dust drifting between stars obey the same laws. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, or perhaps simply watches. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only observed. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Let the silence settle like a blanket. Tonight the universe whispers again. Sleep will come soon, and the cosmos will keep watch. A broken column stands half buried in sand, its shadow stretching longer than memory as the sun lowers itself toward the horizon. I have stood before ruins like this traveller, running my fingers along stone that still holds the warmth of ancient days, wondering what kind of certainty allows a civilization to stop speaking all at once. Evidence does not always arrive as revelation. Sometimes it appears as a pattern of absence, a quiet agreement between places that never spoke to each other again. Across Mesopotamia, the archaeological record tells a strangely consistent story. At Nippur, at Eridu, at Uruk, ritual life halts within the same narrow span of time, not gradually, not unevenly. The temples do not show signs of invasion or fire. Instead, they look paused. Offering tables remain set. Ceremonial vessels sit where they were last touched. Renovations are left on unfinished tools resting where hands released them. In geology, such uniformity is rare. In human history, it is almost unheard of. When scientists see synchronized change across distant systems, they look for a common cause. Climate shifts leave signatures in ice cores and sediment layers. Volcanic winters darken skies across continents. Yet here there is no layer of ash, no evidence of flood, no environmental catastrophe that could explain a coordinated spiritual silence. The earth itself does not appear disturbed. Only human behavior changes. Only ritual stops. It is as if an instruction was received and followed without resistance. The tablets themselves deepen the unease. Their language is not devotional. It does not plead or praise. It records. Administrative phrasing replaces mythic flourish. The Anunnaki Council decides. The mission is complete. Departure follows. In scientific writing, this tone is unmistakable. It is the voice of systems designed to operate beyond emotion, beyond improvisation. When I first noticed this, I felt the same chill I feel when reading mission logs from space probes, long since silent, their final transmissions calm even as they drift into darkness. Evidence accumulates slowly like sediment at the bottom of a sea. Excavations at Eridu reveal inner sanctums carefully arranged and sealed as if preservation mattered more than access. Objects were not removed for reuse. They were positioned deliberately, then closed away. This suggests foresight. In physics, we recognize intentionality when energy is spent to maintain order against entropy. Someone chose to preserve these spaces against time, knowing they would be left unattended. Carbon dating narrows the window. Early 2nd millennium BCE. Again and again the same range appears. It is a statistical improbability that such synchronization could arise by chance, a 1 in thousands convergence. When patterns like this emerge in data, we pause, we recheck assumptions, we ask whether our framework is too small. Perhaps the same must be done here. Perhaps the evidence does not point to collapse but to coordination. I think of nights spent alone in observatories waiting for signals that may never arrive. There is a discipline to watching. You learn to trust the quiet, to let data speak without forcing it into familiar shapes. The archaeological record of Sumer feels like that. It does not shout, it waits. It invites us to sit with the discomfort of interpretation, to accept that evidence can exist without explanation. The Echo Temple at Nippur offers one of the clearest examples. Its maintenance stops abruptly, yet its structure remains intact. No looting, no repurposing. This is not how human societies usually behave. When systems fail, materials are reused, stones are stripped, sacred spaces become quarries. Here, restraint dominates. It suggests obedience to an instruction that transcended local needs, an authority that did not require enforcement. Some scholars argue for political transition for the slow rise of new powers, but politics leaves traces. Competing cults replace old ones. Symbols change. Here, there is only quiet. A gap. Like a missing chapter torn from a book but never rewritten. The evidence resists conventional narratives. It does not fit collapse models or cultural diffusion. It stands alone like an anomaly in a dataset that refuses to average out. In astronomy, anomalies often point to new physics. The orbit of Mercury once defied explanation until relativity expanded our understanding of gravity. Perhaps the Sumerian silence asks for a similar expansion. Not toward belief, but toward scale. Toward the possibility that these societies were responding to forces operating on timelines and priorities far beyond human politics. Dust settles differently when nothing disturbs it. Over centuries, these temples became sealed archives, their silence preserved by the very absence of human interference. Erosion became time thinking slowly, smoothing edges while protecting interiors. Ruins became frozen echoes of a decision made elsewhere, perhaps under a different sky. What remains is evidence without instruction. Stones aligned to stars that still rise. Calendars that outlive their makers. Texts that speak of completion rather than defeat. When I look at this record, I do not feel fear. I feel a kind of professional humility. The recognition that the universe does not arrange itself for our comfort. That some data points remain unresolved for centuries. Tonight, traveller, let the evidence rest beside you. You do not need to solve it. You only need to observe it gently as one observes distant galaxies whose light began its journey long before we were born. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved quickly. Some are meant to slow us down. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Evidence can exist without answers. Silence can be a form of communication. Tonight the universe whispers again, and we listen without urgency, letting sleep draw closer as the ruins keep their secrets. A slab of stone lies cracked beneath a sky that no longer remembers the hands that measured it, its surface marked with lines that do not quite belong to art or utility. I have seen markings like these in many places, traveller, where intention outpaced explanation. They linger at the edges of ruins, refusing to settle into known categories, as if anomaly itself were a message left behind for patient minds. Tonight we linger with that discomfort because anomaly is where understanding quietly begins. In the Sumerian record, anomalies appear not as spectacle, but as precision where none should exist. Astronomical calculations recorded on tablets exceed what naked eye observation should allow. Timelines align too cleanly with celestial cycles that repeat only once in thousands of years. In science, when measurements outperform instruments, we suspect a missing tool. When predictions precede theory, we look for an unseen framework. The Anunnaki texts feel like that knowledge arriving before the method that should have produced it. Archaeology reveals objects that resist easy classification. Instruments shaped for measurement rather than ritual. Chambers designed for preservation rather than worship. Materials chosen not for symbolism, but for stability, insulation, endurance. Bitumen layered with intent. stones sealed against moisture with chemical understanding that should not have been available. These choices feel technical, not devotional. They suggest a logic that values longevity over immediacy, a mindset familiar to anyone who has designed systems meant to outlast their creators. I remember nights calibrating sensors, watching error margins shrink until the data felt almost too clean. Perfect curves are rare in nature. When they appear, we double-check. The Sumerian anomalies carry that same unsettling neatness. Temples sealed simultaneously, calendars synchronized across regions, ritual cessation aligned within decades across hundreds of kilometers. Human societies do many things chaotically. This was not one of them. The language of the tablets deepens the strangeness. The phrasing resembles logistics, resource accounting, mission status. Even the gods in these texts speak like administrators closing a project. In modern science, such language signals a boundary between intention and execution. Someone planned this, someone expected outcomes, someone measured completion. Myth rarely behaves this way. Bureaucracy does. There are references to cycles that stretch beyond dynasties, beyond lifetimes. Numbers recur, ratios repeat, patterns fold back on themselves like orbital paths. When physicists speak of resonance, they mean systems that respond strongly at specific frequencies. The Sumerian record feels a resonant tuned to intervals that matter cosmically rather than culturally. Time here is not counted in reigns, but in returns. Anomaly also appears in what is missing. We expect panic when gods leave. We expect reformations, new cults, violent reinterpretations. Instead, we find restraint, silence, a gap in the narrative that remains unfilled for centuries. Later civilizations inherit myths without understanding the mechanism beneath them. Like inheriting a machine with the labels worn away, they keep it running without knowing what it was built to do. In astrophysics, dark matter is inferred not by presence, but by effect. Galaxies rotate too fast. Something unseen holds them together. The Anunnaki departure has a similar gravity. It bends history without appearing directly. Civilizations reorganize, power structures shift, knowledge fragments. Yet the cause remains invisible, detectable only through its influence. I've learned to respect anomalies. They are not errors to be erased, but invitations to widen perspective. When data refuses to conform, it often points to a deeper layer of reality. The Sumerian anomalies ask whether our model of ancient humanity is incomplete, whether we have underestimated the frameworks within which early civilizations operated, not because they were more mystical, but because they may have been part of something larger. Consider the care taken to preserve knowledge underground. Not libraries meant for daily use, but repositories designed to wait. This is a familiar strategy in science. Seed vaults, data archives, probes launched with messages for future intelligences. These are acts of faith in time, in continuity beyond presence. The Sumerians appear to have done something similar, guided by instructions that emphasized patience. Even the anomalies in material science whisper quietly. Alloys that resist corrosion. Stonework that distributes weight with uncommon efficiency. Geometries aligned not to streets but to stars that shift slowly over millennia. These are not decorative choices, they are functional, predictive, forward-looking. They imply observers who thought in epochs rather than seasons. What troubles and comforts me equally is the calm embedded in these anomalies. There is no urgency, no warning inscribed for future generations. Just preparation, just structure. In my own work, the calmest documents are often the most serious. Emergency protocols are written plainly. Final contingencies avoid drama. The Anunnaki record feels like that. Serious without fear. As a listener, you might feel the weight of this strangeness settling gently like dust on an undisturbed floor. There's no need to resolve it tonight. Anomaly does not demand answers immediately. It asks for attention, for stillness, for the willingness to let questions remain open without anxiety. I find peace in that openness, in the quiet acceptance that some systems operate beyond our current resolution. The universe is filled with phenomena we can describe but not yet explain. Dark energy, consciousness, time itself. The Sumerian anomalies join that list not as proof of anything but as reminders of humility. Perhaps the greatest anomaly is that humanity continued at all. That knowledge fractured yet persisted. That calendars kept turning. That stars were still watched even after their watchers stepped back. This resilience suggests that the withdrawal, whatever its nature, did not end the experiment. It allowed it to proceed. Tonight, traveller, let anomaly be gentle. Let it soften certainty rather than sharpen fear. You are not meant to solve it before sleep. You are meant to feel its presence like a distant hum beneath awareness. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Anomaly is simply the universe reminding us that our maps are not the territory. Silence is the universe thinking. Tonight the universe whispers again, and we drift a little deeper, carried by questions that know how to wait. A corridor stretches beneath the earth, its stone walls absorbing sound until even footsteps feel unnecessary. I have stood in places like this, traveller, where silence is not the absence of noise, but a presence of its own, thick and deliberate. In such spaces the mind slows, breath deepens, and time loosens its grip. The Sumerian silence begins here, not as an ending, but as a condition carefully prepared and patiently maintained. When the Anunnaki records fall quiet, they do so with remarkable discipline. There is no chaos in the transition, no desperate attempt to replace what was lost. Instead, human society continues altered but intact, as if the silence itself had been anticipated. In scientific systems, silence often marks stability rather than failure. Instruments fall quiet when equilibrium is reached. Background noise fades when a system settles into a steady state. Perhaps the Sumerian world entered such a phase, guided gently into independence. Archaeological layers tell us that life went on. Fields were planted, cities persisted, trade routes adjusted, yet something fundamental changed. The direct voice of the gods withdrew, replaced by interpretation, omen, symbol. Silence became the medium through which meaning was filtered. In cognitive science, we know that humans adapt quickly to new informational environments. Remove a signal, and the brain learns to infer. Patterns emerge where instructions once existed. I think often of observatories after a signal has passed. The equipment remains active, scanning empty sky, recording nothing but cosmic background radiation. Yet this emptiness is not meaningless. It tells us where something is no longer present. The Sumerian temples feel like that. Structures built to receive communication now listening only to echoes. Silence here is data. The absence of direct intervention may have been intentional, even ethical. In developmental biology, systems mature by gradually reducing external control. Too much guidance stunts growth. Too little invites collapse. The Anunnaki silence feels calibrated, not abrupt. A withdrawal measured in decades rather than moments. A fade rather than a break. Such restraint implies confidence in the system left behind. Over time, silence reshaped belief. Gods became distant. Ritual became symbolic. Knowledge fragmented into myth. This is not decay, but transformation. Information does not disappear. It changes state. Like energy converting from one form to another, guidance shifted from instruction to memory. Dust became archive, story became vessel. I have spent nights listening to recordings of space, to the faint hiss of cosmic microwave background radiation, the afterglow of creation itself. It is the quietest signal we know yet. It contains the history of the universe. The Sumerian silence may function similarly, a low-level hum beneath civilization encoding origin departure, and possibility without explicit explanation. There is comfort in this thought. That silence is not abandonment, but a different kind of presence, a watchful distance. In psychology, we learn that absence can shape behavior as strongly as presence. A parent stepping back allows a child to walk alone. A teacher falling silent invites discovery. Perhaps the Anunnaki silence was meant to teach humanity how to listen inwardly, outwardly, patiently. As centuries passed, humans filled the silence with meaning. New gods emerged, new stories formed. Yet beneath them, older patterns persisted. Calendars still tracked the sky. Temples remained aligned to stars long after their purpose was forgotten. Architecture continued to echo ancient ratios. This persistence suggests that silence did not erase influence, it embedded it. I imagined scribes realizing slowly that no new instructions were coming, that answers would no longer arrive fully formed. This realization must have been both frightening and liberating. In science, we reach similar moments when a theory stops yielding predictions. We must either abandon it or extend it ourselves. Humanity chose extension. Silence also protected. Without direct divine presence, there was nothing to attack, nothing to overthrow. Power shifted from external authority to internal organization. Law replaced command, debate replaced decree. Civilization learned to negotiate with itself. The silence forced accountability. At night, when my instruments rest and the world grows quiet, I feel this same transition, the moment when external stimulation fades and thought turns inward. Sleep begins not with noise, but with the gentle withdrawal of signal. The Anunnaki silence mirrors this descent. It is not an end, but a threshold. Perhaps this is why the records remain calm, why there is no warning carved into stone. The silence was meant to be lived, not explained, experienced across generations rather than decoded in a single lifetime. A long experiment in autonomy. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, or perhaps simply watches. But here on Earth, silence became the space in which humanity learned to speak for itself. Not loudly, not confidently, but persistently. Tonight, traveller, let this silence surround you. Not as emptiness, but as depth, as the quiet that allows dreams to form. You are not alone in it, you are part of it. Silence is the universe thinking, and you're thinking with it. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Silence does not demand comprehension. It offers rest. Tonight the universe whispers again softly enough that sleep can finally take you while the ancient quiet keeps its watch. A shoreline emerges from the mist of deep time, its stones smoothed by waters that no longer touch them. I have seen landscapes like this in satellite images and ancient maps, places where geography itself seems to hesitate, unsure whether it belongs to memory or measurement. This is where the forgotten epoch begins, traveller, not with destruction, but with gradual erasure, as if time itself decided to lower its voice. After the silence settled across Sumer, history did not stop. It softened. Centuries passed, then millennia, and the world continued to move beneath the same sky. Yet something subtle shifted. Knowledge that once arrived whole began to fracture. Instructions became traditions. Procedures turned into rituals. What had once been understood as function slowly transformed into meaning. In cognitive terms, this is how memory fades, not by vanishing, but by becoming symbolic. The forgotten epoch is not marked by catastrophe layers or burned cities. It leaves no obvious scar in the earth. Instead, it appears as a thinning of certainty. Calendars persist, but their original purpose blurs. Alignments remain precise, yet their reasons are no longer recalled. Humanity keeps the shell of knowledge while the core slips quietly away. This is erosion, as time thinking gently and without intention. Archaeologists notice this transition as a change in craftsmanship. Tools remain sophisticated, but innovation slows. Techniques are repeated rather than refined. It is as if humanity entered a period of maintenance rather than exploration. In complex systems theory, this often follows the removal of a guiding framework. Systems stabilize, conserving energy, avoiding risk. Growth pauses not because of failure, but because the direction is no longer clear. I imagine scribes copying tablets whose meanings they only partly understood, preserving signs because they were sacred, not because they were legible. This happens even now. We preserve equations long after the context that birthed them has shifted. We teach methods divorced from their original necessity. Knowledge survives, but thinner like light, stretched across an expanding universe. During the forgotten epoch, myths multiply. Where explanation recedes, story advances. Gods become personalities, cosmic cycles become moral tales. What was once timing becomes destiny. This is not deception, it is adaptation. The human mind seeks coherence, and when structure dissolves, narrative fills the gap. In neuroscience, we know that the brain prefers a story to a void. Yet beneath the stories, patterns remain. The stars still rise in the same order, temples still point toward ancient alignments. Measurements embedded in stone continue to function silently. It is as if someone left a machine running knowing that future operators would not fully understand it but would benefit from its stability. The forgotten epoch is not ignorance. It is inheritance without instructions. I have felt this in my own work inheriting datasets compiled by minds long gone. Sometimes the rationale is missing. Variables are labelled cryptically. Assumptions are unstated. Yet the data still holds value. We trust it cautiously aware that we are downstream from decisions we did not witness. Humanity during this epoch lived inside such inherited systems. Civilizations rose and fell within this quiet framework. Akkad, Babylon, Assyria. Each adapted the remnants of earlier knowledge to new contexts, yet none restored the original clarity. Something essential remained just out of reach, like a word on the tip of the tongue. In physics, we call this a loss of resolution. The signal remains, but noise increases. The forgotten epoch also reshaped humanity's relationship with the sky. Astronomy persisted, but its purpose shifted. Observations once tied to coordination and timing became tools for divination and agriculture. Precision survived, but intention changed. The sky became a mirror for fate rather than a map for movement. This is not regression. It is transformation under uncertainty. I think of long nights spent aligning telescopes, calibrating instruments inherited from previous generations. Sometimes we use them in ways their designers never intended. Sometimes we miss what they were built to detect, yet they still gather light. The forgotten epoch is humanity learning to work with light, whose source is no longer visible. Geologically, this period leaves subtle traces. Sediment layers show continuity rather than rupture. Cities rebuild atop themselves, maintaining orientation even as function shifts. The Earth records persistence more than loss. This is important. It suggests that whatever was forgotten was not essential for survival, only for understanding. Humanity endured without it. Emotionally, this epoch may have been quieter than we imagine. Without direct divine presence, fear receded. Responsibility increased. Humans learned to negotiate with each other rather than appeal upward. Law replaced command. Custom replaced instruction. These are signs of maturation, not decline. In developmental psychology, independence often arrives through loss of certainty. Yet something else happened as well. Without clear memory of origin, humanity began to imagine its own beginnings. Creation myths diversified, identity fractured. Without a shared framework, cultures diverged. This diversity is beautiful, but it carries the cost of fragmentation. Knowledge becomes local. Perspective narrows. The forgotten epoch is the price of autonomy. Sometimes late at night I feel gratitude for forgotten things. Not everything preserved remains healthy. Some knowledge carries burdens. Perhaps forgetting was a mercy. Perhaps the Anunnaki silence allowed humanity to grow without constant comparison, without an unreachable standard overhead. Forgetting can be protective. Still echoes persist, in numbers that recur across cultures, in symbols that appear independently, in architectural ratios repeated without explanation. These are the fossils of understanding, not dead, but compressed, waiting. The forgotten epoch is not an end state. It is a holding pattern. Dust accumulates differently in forgotten places. It settles evenly undisturbed. Time becomes thick rather than sharp. Ruins sleep. And beneath them something older remains intact, sealed not only by stone but by the slow acceptance of not knowing. Tonight, traveller, you are touching the edge of that forgotten epoch simply by listening. Memory does not always awaken with clarity. Sometimes it returns as mood, as intuition, as a sense that something once fit together more cleanly than it does now. This feeling is not loss, it is recognition. You're not meant to recover everything. Some epochs are meant to remain half-buried, shaping us indirectly. Like gravity, they influence without announcing themselves. The forgotten epoch still bends our trajectory quietly and patiently. In the end, it is all right to not understand what was lost. Forgetting is part of becoming. Tonight the universe whispers again softly enough that the past does not demand attention, only respect. Let the ancient shoreline fade back into mist. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. A vast plain stretches beneath a dim sky, its surface marked by layers that only patience can read. I have studied such layers in cores pulled from ice and sediment, traveller, where history is compressed into quiet bands of dust and time. Each layer tells of continuity interrupted not by drama but by adjustment. This is where the idea of reset emerges, not as catastrophe but as recalibration, the universe nudging a system back into balance. In the Sumerian world after the silence, there is no single moment of collapse, no sharp edge where one era ends and another begins. Instead, there is a gentle bending of trajectory. Cities reorganize, power redistributes, knowledge fragments and reforms. This is not destruction. It is reset. In complex systems, resets occur when feedback loops grow unstable. The system does not fail. It simplifies. It sheds excess structure to regain resilience. I have seen this in climate models where long periods of relative stability are punctuated by rapid adjustments. Temperatures shift. Circulation patterns reorganize. Life persists, altered but intact. The Sumerian reset feels similar. A transition guided not by chaos but by thresholds. When certain conditions are met, change becomes inevitable. The Anunnaki departure may have been the release of a constraint allowing humanity to settle into a new equilibrium. Reset does not erase memory completely. It compresses it. What once was explicit becomes implicit. Instructions dissolve into instinct. Calendars remain, but their cosmic significance fades. Alignments persist, but their original purpose is forgotten. This is memory behaving like geology, layered, buried, still exerting pressure from below. Ruins are not failures, they are stabilized remnants of earlier configurations. In science, resets are often invisible to those living through them. They are recognized only in hindsight when patterns clarify. Humanity in the early 2nd millennium BCE likely did not experience a dramatic turning point. Life continued. Crops grew. Children were born. Yet something fundamental shifted beneath awareness. A global system recalibrated quietly without announcement. I imagine this reset as a long night after a storm that never came. The sky remains dark, but the air is still. The danger has passed without being seen. Such moments teach humility. They remind us that not all change announces itself. Some transformations happen beneath perception, shaping futures silently. The reset also altered humanity's relationship with authority. Without direct divine oversight, power became negotiable. Kings justified rule through lineage rather than mandate. Law codes replaced command. Debate entered spaces once reserved for decree. These are signs of systemic maturation. In biology, organisms that lose external regulation develop internal control. The same principle applies here. There is a temptation to frame resets as loss, as decline from a golden age. But decline implies failure. Reset implies adaptation. The Sumerian world did not regress into chaos. It reorganized into forms capable of surviving without external stabilization. That is not weakness. It is resilience. I have felt this personally in moments when guidance disappeared and uncertainty expanded, when mentor stepped back and expectation dissolved. At first, the silence felt heavy. Then, it felt spacious. New patterns emerged. Reset moments are uncomfortable, but they open room for growth that continuous supervision would prevent. The archaeological record supports this interpretation. Post-Sumerian cultures do not show technological collapse. They show diversification. Different regions emphasize different skills. Writing evolves. Mathematics persists. Astronomy adapts. The system becomes more distributed, less centralized. In network theory, such decentralization increases robustness. A single failure no longer collapses the whole. Reset also introduced forgetting as a function. Not all knowledge survives equally. Some ideas are preserved because they serve immediate needs. Others fade because their context vanishes. This selective memory is not random. It reflects priorities shaped by new conditions. Humanity kept what helped it live independently. Geologically resets leave subtle signatures, not the scars of catastrophe but the smoothing of gradients. Rivers shift course gradually. Ecosystems rebalance. The Sumerian reset fits this pattern. No ash layer, no mass burial. Just a change in orientation like a compass slowly aligning to a new field. I think often about gravity as memory. Mass curves space and space remembers that curve long after motion ceases. The Anunnaki presence may have curved human civilization in ways that persisted even after withdrawal. Reset did not flatten the curve. It allowed it to relax gradually, finding a new shape. This reframing removes fear from the narrative. There is no punishment here, no abandonment, only transition. A system once guided, externally learning to govern itself. The silence following the departure becomes less ominous and more instructive. Silence becomes the space in which autonomy forms. Reset also carries an ethical dimension. Interference ends when development reaches a threshold. Continued control would inhibit growth. This principle appears in ecology, education, medicine. Too much intervention destabilizes. The timing of withdrawal matters more than the act itself. The Sumerian records emphasize timing cycles completion. These are the words of measured decision, not indifference. As centuries passed, the reset deepened, myths evolved, symbols replaced mechanisms. Humanity learned to carry meaning without understanding origin. This is not failure. It is how culture adapts when complexity exceeds comprehension. We tell stories when equations become inaccessible. Late at night, when data streams slow and the world quiets, I feel the comfort of reset, the moment when effort yields to acceptance, when the need to control gives way to trust in process. Sleep itself is a reset restoring systems without conscious direction. The Sumerian reset mirrors this biological truth. Perhaps this is why the record feels calm, why there is no urgency carved into stone. The reset was meant to unfold slowly, gently across generations, not as an event to witness, but as a condition to inhabit. Humanity lived through it without naming it. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, or perhaps simply observes the outcomes of that reset. But here on Earth, the reset became the foundation of everything that followed. Law, science, philosophy, art. All grew within the quiet space left behind. Tonight, traveller, allow the idea of reset to settle without resistance. It does not demand alarm, it offers reassurance. Change can occur without catastrophe. Transformation can be gentle. Systems can adapt without breaking. In the end, it is all right to not understand every mechanism. Reset does not explain itself in real time. It reveals itself slowly through stability regained. Silence is the universe thinking, adjusting, recalibrating. Tonight the universe whispers again, softly, reminding us that rest is also a form of progress. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch as the long reset continues quietly, patiently beneath the stars. A low vibration moves through stone long after the source is gone, like a bell, struck once and left to hum in the dark. I have felt this in old observatories and underground chambers, traveller, where sound behaves differently, folding back on itself, refusing to vanish. Echo is not repetition, it is persistence. It is what remains when presence becomes memory, and memory becomes structure. After the reset, the world did not return to silence alone. It carried echoes. Ideas repeated themselves across cultures that never met. Symbols emerged independently, shaped by similar geometries and shared intuitions. The same ratios appeared in distant architecture. The same numbers surfaced in calendars oceans apart. In science, when independent systems converge on similar solutions, we suspect underlying constraints. Nature prefers efficiency. Perhaps culture does too. Echo behaves like gravity. It weakens with distance, but never fully disappears. The Anunnaki withdrawal left behind a curvature in human development subtle but measurable. Civilizations that followed Sumer did not rebuild its world, yet they inherited its orientation. Writing systems evolved, but retained structural similarities. Legal codes diversified but echoed earlier principles. Astronomy advanced, yet kept ancient reference points. These are not coincidences, they are reverberations. I have watched echoes in datasets, Traveller, patterns persisting long after variables change, correlations that survive model updates, residuals that refuse to flatten. Echo tells us that something fundamental once shaped the system. The Sumerian echo is not a story of gods lingering in the sky, but of frameworks lingering in thought. As the forgotten epoch unfolded, echoes grew quieter but more widespread. Knowledge dispersed rather than concentrated. Instead of centralized instruction, humanity carried fragments. A symbol here, a myth there, a measurement embedded in stone. This fragmentation increased resilience. No single failure could erase everything. Echo became a survival strategy. The sky itself carried echoes. Constellations retained ancient groupings long after their original names lost meaning. The Pleiades remained a marker, across cultures a small cluster guiding agriculture, navigation and ritual. In astrophysics, certain stars serve as anchors because of their stability. Human cultures seem to have done the same, anchoring meaning to fixed points that endured. Echo also appears in language. Words drift across regions, mutate, reappear with altered sounds but familiar roots. Concepts survive translation. In linguistics, this persistence reveals deep cognitive structures. The Sumerian echo may have travelled not through text alone, but through patterns of thought that shaped how humans understood order, time and authority. I think often of standing waves, Traveller, when energy reflects within a boundary, reinforcing itself at specific points. The Anunnaki departure may have set up such boundaries within human culture. Certain ideas resonated, others dampened. Over time, what resonated survived, not because it was imposed, but because it fit the structure left behind. Echo is not guidance. It does not tell you what to do. It only suggests where something once was. This distinction matters. Humanity learned to live with echoes rather than instructions. Creativity expanded. Interpretation replaced obedience. Philosophy emerged where command once stood. In this sense, echo is freedom with memory. Archaeology reveals this shift in material form. Art becomes expressive rather than prescriptive. Ritual becomes symbolic rather than procedural. Architecture varies while preserving ancient proportions. Echo allows variation without chaos. It provides a baseline against which innovation can occur. I have felt echo in my own work, inheriting equations whose derivations were lost yet whose accuracy endured. We trust them because they work, not because we remember why they were written. This trust is not blind, it is pragmatic. Humanity treated its inherited knowledge the same way. Echo also carries warning, though quietly. It reminds us that systems once existed that were more integrated, more coherent. Fragmentation brings freedom but also risk. Without shared frameworks, misunderstanding grows. Conflict becomes more likely. Echo cannot prevent this. It can only whisper that something once held things together. Perhaps this is why ancient cultures so often spoke of a golden age, not because it was perfect, but because it was unified. Echo transforms unity into nostalgia. Memory idealizes coherence once it is lost. This does not mean the past was better, it means it was different. In cosmic terms, echo is everywhere. Light from dead stars still reaches us. Gravitational waves ripple long after their sources merge. The universe itself is an echo of its beginning, expanding, cooling, remembering through radiation. Humanity too lives inside echoes of earlier conditions. When I sit quietly with instruments powered down, listening to the faint hum of the building, I feel part of this larger resonance. My thoughts echo those of scientists long gone. My questions mirror theirs, altered by context but familiar in shape. Echo connects us across time. The Anunnaki echo does not require belief. It does not ask for devotion. It exists whether acknowledged or not, embedded in calendars, numbers, myths and ruins. It shapes trajectories invisibly. This makes it more powerful than overt control ever could be. Over generations, echo softened into tradition, then into culture, then into assumption. At each step, distance increased, but influence remained. This is how deep structures operate. They do not announce themselves. They persist quietly, shaping options rather than outcomes. Tonight, traveller, you are listening to an echo as well, not of sound, but of inquiry. A question passed forward, altered by time, asking not what happened, but how influence continues without presence. You do not need to answer it. Feeling it is enough. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Echo does both. It waits patiently in the background, and it watches as new patterns form above it. Humanity's story unfolds within this resonance, neither controlled nor abandoned, but gently constrained by what came before. In the end, it is all right to not trace every echo back to its source. Echo is meaningful even without origin. Silence is the universe thinking, and echo is the memory of that thought lingering. Tonight the universe whispers again, and the echo carries you gently forward. Let it fade as sleep approaches. You are safe within it. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. A sequence of stones curves across an open plain, each placed with care, their alignment forming a shape only visible from a distance. I have learned, traveller, that patterns often hide in plain sight, revealed not by proximity, but by patience. When you step back far enough, repetitions emerge quiet and undeniable. The Sumerian world, long after silence and reset, begins to reveal itself not as chaos, but as pattern. Patterns appear where individual intentions fade. Across centuries, civilizations rise independently yet echo similar structures. Writing systems condense into symbols. Laws organize around balance and restitution. Architecture gravitates toward proportion. Astronomy fixes on recurring markers in the sky. This convergence suggests constraint rather than coincidence. In physics, patterns indicate boundary conditions, the invisible limits that shape what is possible. The pattern left behind by the Anunnaki withdrawal is not a blueprint but a field. Humanity moves within it, adapting freely yet guided subtly by inherited structures. This is how gravity operates. It does not dictate motion, but it shapes paths. The arc of a thrown stone is not commanded. It is allowed. The same may be true of civilization. I've traced patterns in data where none were expected. Noise resolves into structure when enough time passes. In long term, climate records, oscillations emerge that no single lifetime can perceive. The Sumerian pattern requires this scale of attention. It unfolds over millennia, too slow for eyewitnesses, yet clear to those willing to observe patiently. Consider calendars. Despite cultural differences, many ancient systems converge on similar cycles: lunar months, solar years, solar intercalation. These are not arbitrary choices. They reflect a shared attention to the same sky. Yet beyond practicality, deeper patterns appear. Festivals align, sacred intervals repeat. The same numbers recur: 60, 12, 7. These numbers persist not because they are magical, but because they fit the inherited framework. Patterns also manifest in architecture. Proportions recur across regions that never shared stone. Ratios embedded in temples reappear in later monuments, sometimes stripped of meaning yet preserved through imitation. Builders copy what works. Over time, function becomes tradition. Pattern survives intention. In mathematics, we call this emergence, simple rules generating complex behavior. The Anunnaki may have left simple constraints rather than detailed instructions. Humanity filled the space creatively, yet the underlying rules shaped outcomes. This is more elegant than control. It allows diversity while maintaining coherence. Patterns are comforting. They suggest order beneath uncertainty. After silence and reset, humanity may have leaned into pattern, instinctively sensing stability where memory failed. Rituals repeated not because they were understood, but because repetition felt safe. In neuroscience, repetition calms. Predictability reduces anxiety. Pattern becomes a psychological anchor, yet pattern can also obscure origin. When repetition persists long enough, its cause is forgotten. The shape remains, but the reason dissolves. This is how myths form. Stories arise to explain patterns whose origins are no longer accessible. Myth is not falsehood. It is compression. It stores meaning when detail cannot be retained. I have seen this in scientific education. Formulas taught without derivation. Rules memorized without context. They work, so they survive. The Sumerian pattern may have survived in the same way carried forward, because it produced stability, not because its source was remembered. Patterns also bridge cultures. Independent civilizations often rediscover similar solutions. Pyramidal forms, hierarchical organization, symbolic triads. This convergence suggests that certain patterns are attractors' natural resting states for complex systems. The Anunnaki influence may have nudged humanity toward these attractors, then stepped away confident that the system would settle. Astronomy offers a powerful analogy. Planetary systems form within protoplanetary disks constrained by gravity and angular momentum. Individual planets vary, yet the system shares a recognizable structure. Humanity's cultural evolution may have unfolded within a similar disk of inherited constraints. I imagine ancient observers watching the sky, noticing the same stars rise and set as their ancestors had. Without knowing why those stars mattered, they kept watching. Attention itself became tradition. Pattern does not require explanation to persist. It only requires participation. As centuries passed, patterns hardened into institutions. Law codes crystallized. Social roles stabilized. Education formalized. These developments feel human, yet they may have been accelerated by inherited structures that favored organization over improvisation. Pattern rewards order. At night, when I review long data sets, I sometimes feel a quiet satisfaction when a pattern reveals itself. Not excitement. Calm. The sense that the system is intelligible even if not fully understood. The Sumerian pattern evokes that same calm. It suggests that history, like nature, follows tendencies even when agents are unaware of them. Pattern also implies limitation. Not everything is possible. Some paths are unlikely, others repeat. Recognizing pattern does not diminish freedom, it contextualizes it. We choose within fields shaped by forces we did not create. This is true of physics, biology, and culture alike. The danger lies in mistaking pattern for destiny. Patterns guide, but they do not command. Humanity has always had the capacity to break patterns, to innovate beyond them. The Anunnaki pattern did not freeze civilization. It provided scaffolding, not chains. As modern observers, we are tempted to project intention backward, to imagine planners designing outcomes, but patterns can arise without foresight. Simple constraints yield complex regularities. The Anunnaki departure may have left conditions rather than commands. The pattern emerged organically. Tonight, traveller, let pattern feel gentle. It does not demand belief. It invites recognition. Notice how often human history repeats shapes, even as stories change. Notice how stability arises from repetition, and innovation from deviation. You're not trapped within pattern. You are carried by it like a current that supports movement without dictating direction. Understanding this brings humility, not fear. We are participants in a larger system, not its masters. In the end, it is all right to not trace every pattern to its origin. Pattern exists whether we explain it or not. Silence is the universe thinking, and pattern is thought settling into form. Tonight the universe whispers again. Let the repetition soothe you rather than constrain you. Drift with them gently as sleep approaches. You are safe within the pattern. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. A fissure runs through ancient stone, not wide enough to collapse the structure, but deep enough to signal strain beneath the surface. I've seen fractures like this in ice sheets and fault lines, traveller, where the system appears stable until a quiet threshold is crossed. Warnings do not always arrive as alarms. Often they emerge as subtle deviations, small irregularities that only matter if someone is patient enough to notice them. Within the Sumerian record, warnings are never explicit. No tablet announces disaster. No voice proclaims punishment. Instead, warnings appear encoded in timing, in restraint, in what was prepared and what was withheld. The Anunnaki did not leave chaos behind. They left boundaries. They left conditions under which intervention would no longer occur. This absence itself is a warning, though a gentle one. From this point forward, consequences would belong to humanity alone. In systems theory, removing a stabilizing force increases sensitivity to error. Small mistakes amplify. Feedback loops tighten. The system becomes responsible for its own regulation. This is not failure. it is adulthood. The Sumerian withdrawal carries this same implication. Humanity was no longer buffered. The warning was not about catastrophe, but about accountability. Evidence of this shift appears slowly. Warfare intensifies over centuries, resource competition sharpens, cities grow denser, then strain under their own complexity. These developments are not sudden. They are gradual, like stress accumulating in a material tested beyond its original parameters. The warning embedded in the silence is that growth without oversight demands wisdom equal to power. I think of climate system traveller. For centuries, small changes appear manageable, then a tipping point arrives invisible until crossed. The Sumerians may have understood this intuitively. Their emphasis on cycles on appointed times suggests awareness that systems operate within limits. The departure may have been timed precisely to avoid catastrophic interference, leaving humanity to confront its own thresholds. There are hints that knowledge was deliberately constrained. Certain techniques were preserved only symbolically, others were buried. This is not secrecy born of malice. It resembles ethical containment. In medicine, we withhold treatments until patients are ready to manage side effects. In education, we do not teach advanced concepts before foundational ones are stable. The Anunnaki warning may have been embedded in restraint. Myths emerging after the forgotten epoch often center on hubris, on humans reaching too far, on floods, fires, and collapses. These stories are not predictions, they are reflections. Cultures remembering that imbalance invites correction, whether natural or social. Warning becomes narrative once instruction fades. Archaeology supports this interpretation. Many advanced practices appear then vanish not because they failed, but because the context that sustained them dissolved. Metallurgical techniques lost. Architectural methods simplified. This selective forgetting acts as a brake preventing runaway complexity. Warning through limitation rather than command. In my own work, I've learned to respect thresholds. Instruments saturate, models break down. Data becomes unreliable beyond certain ranges. Pushing past these limits produces not clarity but error. The universe is generous, but not forgiving of ignorance. The Sumerian warning carries this same tone, not fear but caution. The sky itself offers warnings quietly. Stellar cycles mark times of change. Planetary alignments alter gravitational balances. Ancient astronomers watched these movements not for prophecy but for timing. Acting at the wrong moment carried risk. Acting too early or too late could destabilize entire systems. The Anunnaki emphasis on appointed times suggests deep respect for these constraints. Over centuries, humanity learned to ignore subtle warnings. Noise increased, attention shortened, memory fragmented. This is not condemnation, it is observation. Complex systems often outgrow their early safeguards. Warning signals become normalized. Risk accumulates unnoticed, yet warnings persist. In climate patterns, in ecological stress, in social inequality. These modern signals echo ancient ones, though expressed through different mechanisms. The message remains unchanged. Systems demand balance. Silence after guidance is not permission for excess. It is an invitation to self-regulation. I do not believe the Anunnaki intended punishment. Punishment implies judgment. What remains feels more like expectation, a belief that humanity would learn to read warnings embedded in the world itself. In this sense, the earth became the teacher. Weather, resources, disease, consequence replaced command. There is something profoundly respectful in this withdrawal. Trust placed in a developing species, space given for error and learning. Warning encoded not in fear, but in reality. Reality is the most honest instructor. As a listener, you may feel unease here, and that is natural. Warnings touch vulnerability. But there is no urgency in this story, no countdown. Warnings exist precisely because time remains. They are meaningful only when change is still possible. Late at night, when I review data showing slow trends bending upward or downward, I feel the same quiet responsibility. Knowing that attention matters, that early recognition prevents collapse, that ignoring warnings is a choice, not an accident. The Anunnaki warning may still be unfolding not as prophecy, but as condition. Humanity now lives inside a system where consequences are no longer intercepted. This is not abandonment. It is trust taken seriously. Tonight, traveller, let this warning rest gently beside you. It does not demand action now. It asks only for awareness, for humility, for the recognition that silence after guidance carries responsibility. In the end, it is all right to not know how to respond immediately. Warnings are not commands, they are signals. Silence is the universe thinking, and warning is thought leaning toward care. Tonight the universe whispers again. Let the caution be soft, not sharp. Let sleep come without fear. The cosmos will keep watch even as it waits for us to learn how to watch ourselves. Above every ruin, the sky remains unchanged, vast and patient, watching civilizations rise and soften into dust. I have spent long nights beneath it, traveller instruments, cooling beside me, maps weighed down by stones listening to wind slide across metal. The sky does not speak loudly. It teaches through repetition, through motion so slow it feels eternal. Long after the Anunnaki withdrew, the sky continued its lessons, indifferent yet attentive, offering orientation without instruction. In Sumer, the sky was not distant, it was administrative. Stars were counted, catalogued, assigned paths and duties. This was not worship in the modern sense, but observation bordering on governance. The heavens functioned as a reference system stable enough to anchor calendars, rituals and decisions. When the Anunnaki departed, this celestial order did not collapse. It became the last remaining constant. Astronomy outlived theology. Temples fell silent, but the sky continued to move with precise indifference. Planets traced their loops. Stars rose and set on schedule. Eclipses returned when expected. This reliability mattered. In systems where authority withdrawals remaining constants become teachers. The sky offered a form of continuity that required no intervention. I imagine the first generations after the departure lifting their eyes upward, searching not for presence, but for reassurance. The same stars still there, the same cycles intact. In physics we call this boundary stability. When internal variables shift, external constants preserve coherence. The sky became a stabilizing boundary for human meaning. Even today, astronomy offers perspective without judgment. It reminds us that time extends far beyond any single narrative. Light arriving from distant stars left its source before humanity learned to write. This knowledge humbles, it dissolves urgency. The Anunnaki sky did the same. It slowed human attention, stretched thought across generations. The Sumerian emphasis on celestial paths reflects an understanding that movement matters more than destination. Planets wander, stars drift subtly. Nothing remains fixed forever yet, patterns persist long enough to guide action. This balance between change and regularity defines cosmic order. It also defines maturity. When authority exists, direction is given. When authority withdraws, orientation must be learned. The sky offers orientation without command. North remains north. Seasons repeat. Time flows. Humans learn to align themselves rather than wait to be directed. I have watched students encounter the night sky through telescopes for the first time. Their voices soften, their questions slow. The immensity recalibrates priorities. I suspect ancient observers felt something similar standing on ziggurats under stars that felt close enough to touch. The sky does not inspire panic, it inspires patience. Records show that after the forgotten epoch, astronomical precision increased rather than declined. Observation intensified, measurements refined. Without divine presence, humans became more attentive, not less. Responsibility sharpened perception. This is a familiar pattern in science. When models must stand alone, rigor improves. The sky also preserved memory. Constellations carried stories long after their meanings blurred. Names changed. Shapes shifted slightly due to precession, yet the act of watching persisted. Memory embedded itself not in texts alone, but in habit. Habit outlasts belief. I find comfort in this. Even if meanings are lost, practices endure. Watching the sky requires no dogma. It requires only curiosity and time. The Anunnaki left humanity with a universe that could still be studied, measured, questioned. This is not abandonment. It is generosity. Sky phenomena also mark thresholds. Comets appear, rarely disrupting expectation. Supernovae flare, briefly then fade. These events remind observers that change can be sudden even in stable systems. Ancient cultures interpreted these signs differently, but all recognized their significance. The sky warns without explanation. Modern astrophysics confirms this intuition. Cosmic events shape planetary conditions. Solar activity influences climate. Asteroid impacts alter biological trajectories. The sky is not passive backdrop. It is active participant. Ancient awareness of this may explain the reverence without fear. I often think of cosmic background radiation, the faint afterglow of the universe's beginning. It permeates everything, invisible yet measurable. A whisper from the origin of all structure. Humanity lives inside this radiation, unaware yet shaped by it. The sky carries memory deeper than any civilization. The Anunnaki departure did not remove this memory. It revealed it. Without intermediaries, humans encountered the universe directly. Science would take millennia to formalize this relationship, but the foundation was laid in silence and observation. Skywatching cultivates humility. You cannot dominate what you cannot reach. You can only align. This lesson matters. Civilizations that forget humility overextend. The sky reminds us of scale. It reduces ego gently without force. Late at night when clouds part and stars emerge unexpectedly, I feel the same quiet reset. Concerns shrink. Questions broaden. The sky does not answer, but it reframes. Perhaps this is its role. Not to explain, but to contextualize. As humanity advanced, tools improved. Lenses sharpened. Calculations deepened. Yet the emotional response remained constant. Or calm, a sense of belonging to something larger, yet indifferent. This paradox soothes rather than unsettles. The Anunnaki sky was never owned, it was shared. Even now it remains beyond borders, beyond ideology. Satellites cross boundaries without permission. Light ignores language. The sky unites without intention. Tonight, traveller, the same sky arches above you. The same stars trace ancient paths. You do not need to know their names. Watching is enough. Awareness itself is participation. In the end, it is all right to not understand the sky fully. It was never meant to be solved, only observed. Silence is the universe thinking, and the sky is thought made visible. Tonight the universe whispers again. Let your gaze soften, even if your eyes are closed. Sleep beneath the same vastness that watched the first cities fade. You are not lost in space. You are part of it. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. There is a moment just before dawn when the air changes without announcing itself. Temperature shifts slightly. Shadows lose their edges. I've learned to notice this traveller during long nights of observation when sleep never quite arrives. Return does not always mean arrival. Sometimes it means conditions quietly aligning systems, drifting back into resonance without any single event marking the change. In the Sumerian records, return is never described as descent or conquest. It is framed as reapproach, as realignment, as a future moment when paths once separated might cross again under precise conditions. This language is careful. It avoids urgency. It suggests patience measured not in years, but in cycles large enough to absorb civilizations. From a scientific perspective, return requires stability. A system must survive long enough to be worth revisiting. A planet must maintain atmosphere, magnetic field, and biosphere. A species must demonstrate continuity, memory, and restraint. The Anunnaki departure reads less like abandonment and more like a long experiment, one designed to test whether equilibrium could be sustained without intervention. I often think of probes sent into deep space. Once launched, they operate autonomously, transmitting data back across decades. Engineers design them not to be perfect, but resilient. They are expected to drift to degrade, yet still function within acceptable limits. Humanity may have been treated similarly, left to operate independently, observed from afar, allowed to fail and adapt. Return then is not a promise, it is a conditional possibility. Ancient texts emphasize appointed times, not guaranteed outcomes. This distinction matters. A return only makes sense if something remains to return to. The warning embedded earlier flows naturally into this logic. Survival precedes reunion. Astronomy reinforces this view. Orbits are predictable only with intolerance. Perturbations accumulate. Long-term stability is rare. For two paths to cross, again after long separation, requires precision, patience, and conservation of structure. The Anunnaki return, if ever possible, would depend less on intention than on alignment. Human cultures preserve this idea symbolically. Myths of returning gods often emphasize preparation rather than anticipation. Rituals focused on readiness, not summoning. Temples were maintained. Knowledge guarded, not to force return, but to remain legible if observation resumed. I imagine distant watchers not observing continuously, but sampling periodically like astronomers revisiting a star system after long intervals, checking for atmospheric signatures, for technological noise, for signs of instability or maturity. Return becomes an assessment, not a rescue. In modern science, we do this instinctively. We monitor ecosystems. We revisit experiments. We check long-term outcomes. The patience required feels unnatural in daily life, yet essential for understanding complex systems. The Anunnaki framework appears to operate on this scale. Return also implies restraint. Intervening too early disrupts natural development. Intervening too late risks irreversible damage. Timing becomes ethical. Ancient emphasis on cycles suggests awareness of this dilemma. Action at the wrong moment can collapse what might otherwise stabilize. Personally, I have learned the cost of mistimed intervention. Adjusting an instrument before it equilibrates introduces noise. Correcting a model before enough data accumulates produces error. Waiting is not passivity. It is discipline. The universe rewards patience more than control. The Sumerian return narratives feel shaped by this discipline. They lack spectacle. They avoid imagery of descent or revelation. Instead, they speak of gates, opening paths, clearing conditions, ripening. Return as process, not event. This framing removes fear. If return depends on readiness, then humanity is not judged by belief, but by balance. Ecological stability, social coherence, intellectual humility. These qualities do not require worship, they require attention. Modern parallels are impossible to ignore. Climate thresholds, technological acceleration, global interconnection. Humanity now operates on scales once reserved for planetary forces. We have become a variable capable of destabilizing the system that sustains us. In this context, return becomes not salvation, but observation of outcome. Some may find this unsettling. Others find it respectful. Being trusted with autonomy implies dignity. The Anunnaki departure and conditional return may represent confidence rather than abandonment. Confidence that humanity could learn, adapt, and self-regulate. I do not imagine watchers waiting impatiently. I imagine long intervals of silence, centuries passing without review, then brief moments of attention, subtle and distant measuring signals against expectations. Return does not require physical presence to begin. It begins with noticing. Radio astronomy already practices this. We listen for anomalies, narrowband signals, unexpected patterns, most are noise, a few warrant follow-up. Attention itself becomes return in miniature. If return ever occurs, it may not look like myth. It may resemble confirmation, recognition that a system achieves stability without supervision, that its intelligence matured beyond dependence, that intervention is no longer necessary or finally safe. This possibility reframes anxiety. The question is not when return happens, but whether it needs to. A successful system does not require oversight. It earns independence. In this sense, the best outcome is quiet continuation. Yet ancient texts preserve the option. Not certainty, but openness. Return as potential, not destiny. This keeps humility alive. It reminds humanity that larger frameworks exist even if unseen. Late at night, when I step outside laboratories and look upward, I feel this openness. Not expectation, not dread. Just awareness that the universe contains processes far larger than our immediate concerns. This awareness is grounding. Return, then, is less about beings and more about relationship. a relationship between intelligence and environment, between agency and consequence, between freedom and responsibility. The Anunnaki narrative uses departure and return as metaphors for these dynamics. As a listener, you're not required to believe any literal interpretation. The emotional truth remains regardless. Systems thrive when balance is respected. Observation matters. Patience matters. Silence is not absence. It is space for growth. In the end, traveller return may already be happening in the most subtle way, in our capacity to reflect, in our willingness to pause, in our recognition of limits. These are signs of maturity, not decline. It is all right to not know what return looks like. Some mysteries remain conditional by nature. Silence is the universe thinking, and return is thought considering whether intervention is still required. Tonight, the universe whispers again. Let that whisper remain distant, gentle, non-urgent. Sleep does not delay understanding, it deepens it. Rest now. If return ever comes, it will find you part of a species that learned how to wait. The ground beneath us feels solid only because we move slowly across it. I learned this during fieldwork. Traveller standing on plains that once lay under oceans, tracing fossils embedded in stone, that remembered pressure and time better than any archive. Earth is not static. It is a long experiment in balance, constantly adjusting, erasing, rebuilding. Whatever the Anunnaki left behind, it was entrusted not to the sky alone, but to this restless surface. Earth received the silence first. Temples emptied, rituals ceased. Voices lifted, no longer echoed between walls. Yet erosion continued its work without pause. Rivers shifted courses. Floodplains expanded and contracted. Sediment accumulated quietly, bearing foundations that once felt permanent. This is how Earth responds to absence. It does not mourn, it reprocesses. In geology, memory is written in layers. Each stratum marks an interval, not an event. Catastrophes leave thin signatures. Long stability leaves thick ones. The Sumerian withdrawal left no dramatic scar in stone. Instead, it coincided with transitions already underway. Climate fluctuations, river migrations, soil salinization. Earth did not reset because the Anunnaki left. It continued its cycles indifferent to myth. This indifference is not cruelty, it is fairness. Earth applies the same rules to everything. Tectonic plates do not pause for civilizations. Atmospheres do not negotiate. Life adapts or relocates or ends. Understanding this shifts perspective. The Anunnaki story becomes not one of abandonment but of alignment with planetary reality. I have spent long hours examining core samples, traveller reading climate history compressed into meters of ice and rock. Patterns emerge, warm periods, cooling phases, abrupt transitions followed by gradual recoveries. Humanity appears late in this record, fragile and inventive, adapting rapidly to changing conditions. Earth taught resilience long before any external guide. After the forgotten epoch, human societies began responding more directly to Earth's signals. Agricultural practices adjusted, settlements relocated, architecture adapted to floods and heat. Knowledge became local again, tuned to terrain rather than decree. This localization increased diversity. Earth favours diversity. Monocultures fail quickly. Varied systems endure. The Anunnaki emphasis on observation may have prepared humanity for this shift. Without centralized instruction, people listened more closely to land and weather. Empirical knowledge replaced ritual certainty. Trial and error replaced prescription. Earth became instructor, not adversary. In this sense, Earth completed the education that departure began. The sky offered orientation. Earth demanded adaptation. Together they formed a curriculum without words. Those who listened survived. Those who ignored signals vanished, leaving ruins as reminders rather than lessons. I often think of ruins half swallowed by vegetation, stones displaced by roots, walls softened by moss. Earth does not erase violently, it absorbs. Over time, human constructions become part of the landscape, their sharp edges rounded, their purposes forgotten. This absorption is not failure, it is integration. Earth also preserves selectively. Certain materials endure, fired clay, stone, bone, others dissolve quickly. Organic matter returns to cycle. The archaeological record is biased toward what resists decay. Our interpretation of the past is shaped by Earth preferences. Silence fills gaps where materials failed to persist. This matters when considering Anunnaki absence. Perhaps much was lost simply because it was made of perishable things. Knowledge encoded in practice rather than artifact. Systems designed to fade gracefully rather than dominate indefinitely. Earth rewards humility of material. In planetary science, sustainability is defined by equilibrium. Inputs balanced by outputs. Energy flows managed. Waste reintegrated. Earth operates this way instinctively. Human systems struggle to learn it. The Anunnaki withdrawal may have forced this lesson. Without external correction, imbalance becomes visible quickly. Modern environmental challenges echo this ancient dynamic. Resource extraction accelerates. Feedback loops tighten. Earth responds predictably, though not gently. Climate shifts. Ecosystems reorganize. These are not punishments. They are adjustments. Earth maintaining balance regardless of intention. I find comfort in this impartiality. Earth does not judge. It responds. Understanding this reduces fear. It reframes responsibility. We are not being tested. We are participating in a system that requires awareness. Ancient cultures sensed this intuitively. Personifying Earth as mother or deity was an attempt to relate emotionally to processes beyond control. Today, we model these processes mathematically. The language differs. The humility required remains the same. The Anunnaki narrative fits neatly into this framework. Their departure did not alter Earth's rules. It removed mediation. Humanity was exposed directly to planetary consequence. This exposure accelerates learning, though, at cost. I have watched landscapes recover after disturbance. Forests regrow differently. Rivers carve new channels. Life returns altered but resilient. Earth does not aim to restore previous states. It moves forward. This forward motion defines evolution more than preservation. Human civilizations often resist this. We seek permanence. Earth teaches impermanence patiently. Every city is temporary. Every structure negotiates with time. Accepting this reduces anxiety. It aligns expectation with reality. Perhaps the deepest lesson Earth offers after departure is scale. Our lifespans are brief, our institutions fragile. Yet the planet persists, adjusting across millions of years. Seeing oneself as moment rather than culmination brings peace. At night, when I walk across soil still warm from day's heat, I feel continuity beneath my feet. Layers supporting layers. Lives building upon lives. The Earth remembers everything, though not in ways we easily read. You listener are part of this memory. Your body composed of recycled elements. Your breath exchanged with plants and oceans. The Anunnaki story, whatever its literal truth, sits lightly atop a much older narrative written in stone and motion. In the end, it is all right to let Earth have the final word. Silence is the universe thinking, and Earth is thought made tangible, patient, and ongoing. Tonight, the universe whispers again through soil and stone. Let that steadiness carry you downward into rest. Sleep, traveller. Earth will keep you as it always has. There comes a moment, often late at night, when the mind stops reaching outward and turns gently back upon itself. I have felt this many times, traveller sitting alone with notebooks open. Data, incomplete questions, unresolved. Reflection is not analysis. It is what happens when urgency dissolves and understanding is allowed to remain unfinished. In the long arc of the Anunnaki story, reflection is where meaning finally settles. Looking back across silence echo pattern, warning sky return and earth a quieter truth emerges. Nothing in this narrative demands belief. It invites recognition. The structures described are familiar because they mirror how complex systems behave everywhere from galaxies to cells. Intervention gives way to autonomy. Guidance yields to consequence. Observation replaces instruction. This is not mythology alone. It is process. The Anunnaki departure viewed through reflection becomes less about beings and more about transition. A civilization learning to exist without guardians. a species stepping into responsibility without certainty. Reflection allows us to see that uncertainty is not failure, it is condition. Every mature system operates without guarantees. In science, we rarely know the full story. We infer, we model, we approximate. Our confidence comes not from certainty, but from consistency. The Sumerian records feel consistent in this way, not precise enough to control, but stable enough to guide interpretation. Reflection accepts this ambiguity rather than resisting it. I have learned over years of study that the most reliable truths are quiet. They do not announce themselves. They do not require defense. They simply remain when noise fades. The idea that humanity was left to develop, independently observed, rather than controlled, persists because it fits what we see. Growth through error, learning through consequence. Innovation emerging from necessity. Reflection also softens fear. When stories are viewed as metaphors rather than threats, their emotional weight changes. The Anunnaki no longer loom as judges or saviors. They recede into function, representing forces that initiate, withdraw, and wait. This distance is calming. It places responsibility where it belongs. Human history is filled with moments of imagined abandonment, gods falling silent, empires collapsing, certainties dissolving. Reflection reveals a pattern beneath these moments. Silence often precedes adaptation. Loss of guidance forces creativity. When answers disappear, questions mature. In my own life, the most important insights arrived after mentors stepped away, after structure loosened, after certainty failed. Discomfort preceded growth. Reflection transformed loss into context. Perhaps humanity's story mirrors this deeply personal process on a civilizational scale. The Anunnaki narrative survives not because it offers answers, but because it asks enduring questions. What happens when guidance ends? How systems behave without oversight? Whether intelligence can regulate itself? These questions remain relevant because they are unresolved by nature. Reflection allows us to hold these questions without urgency. We do not need to solve them tonight, or ever. Some questions function as companions rather than problems. They shape perspective simply by existing. There is humility in recognizing that we may never know what truly happened in deep antiquity. Records fragment. Interpretations shift. New evidence reframes old conclusions. Reflection accepts this instability. Knowledge becomes provisional, adaptable, alive. In astrophysics, we study light that left its source millions of years ago. What we see may no longer exist as it once was. Yet the observation remains meaningful. The Anunnaki story may be similar. Whatever its origin, its influence persists through the questions it generates. Reflection also reminds us that humanity is not isolated in its uncertainty. Every species navigates without complete information. Evolution proceeds through variation and selections, not foresight. Intelligence does not eliminate uncertainty. It learns to coexist with it. I sometimes imagine the Anunnaki not as departed beings, but as earlier phases of intelligence facing the same questions we face now. When to intervene, when to withdraw, when to trust a system to evolve on its own. Reflection collapses distance. It reveals continuity rather than hierarchy. This perspective dissolves resentment. There is no betrayal in withdrawal, no neglect, only transition. In complex systems, sustained intervention often hinders development. Reflection reframes absence as space rather than loss. As listeners, we are invited into this space gently, not to fill it with speculation, but to rest within not knowing. Sleep storytelling thrives here, where certainty loosens and curiosity softens. The mind drifts when pressure lifts. Reflection is where fear becomes humility, where myth becomes metaphor, where silence becomes presence. It does not demand resolution. It offers coherence without closure. Late at night, when instruments are packed away and lights dimmed, reflection feels like standing at the edge of comprehension without needing to step further. The universe does not rush us. It unfolds on scales that dwarf impatience. The Anunnaki narrative at its deepest level teaches patience. Patience with history, with interpretation, with ourselves. It reminds us that understanding is not always additive. Sometimes it emerges when we stop adding. You, traveller, are not required to carry conclusions from this story. Carrying questions is lighter. Reflection asks only that you notice how systems behave when left alone, how balance replaces command, how responsibility replaces obedience. In the end, reflection dissolves hierarchy. There are no higher and lower beings here, only processes unfolding at different scales, only intelligence exploring its limits. It is all right to not understand what the Anunnaki were or whether they existed as described. Reflection does not need answers to function. Silence is the universe thinking, and reflection is thought recognizing itself. Tonight the universe whispers again, not with instruction but with acceptance. Let that acceptance settle. Let questions rest without weight. Let meaning remain fluid. Sleep, traveller. You have reflected enough. The cosmos will keep watch while you drift gently into quiet. There is a gentle moment when thought loosens its grip, when ideas no longer press forward, and attention begins to soften around the edges. I recognize it instantly, traveller. It arrives after long contemplation, when the mind has wandered far enough to grow tired of carrying meaning. Descent into sleep is not collapse. Sleep is not. It is release. It is the body and mind agreeing quietly that nothing more needs to be resolved tonight. Across this journey, we have moved through silence and echo, through pattern and warning, through sky and earth, through reflection and return. Each step asked for patience rather than belief, attention rather than certainty. Now descent begins not with a conclusion but with easing. The universe does not demand that we remain awake to understand it. Understanding often deepens when vigilance fades. In neuroscience, sleep is not absence of activity. It is reorganization. Memories loosen from rigid narratives and redistribute themselves across neural landscapes. Unanswered questions are not erased. They are softened, integrated, placed where they no longer disturb equilibrium. Descent into sleep is the brain practicing humility, acknowledging that not every signal requires immediate interpretation. I've felt this many times after nights of observation, charts incomplete, calculations unfinished, yet clarity arrives not through continued effort but through rest. When consciousness relaxes deeper, patterns surface unforced. Perhaps this is why ancient cultures treated sleep as sacred, a threshold state, where knowledge reorganizes itself without instruction. The Anunnaki story held gently behaves the same way. It does not need to be solved before rest. It can descend with you shedding sharp edges, becoming texture rather than structure. In sleep, myth becomes atmosphere. History becomes rhythm. Mystery becomes background hum. As you drift, notice how gravity feels stronger, not heavier, but more supportive. The body settles downward as if welcomed. This is not the pull of exhaustion, but of alignment. Muscles release their vigilance, breath lengthens, time stretches. The nervous system shifts from alertness to restoration. Descent mirrors the universe itself. Stars are born from collapse, not expansion. Gas clouds surrender to gravity condensing into form. Rest follows motion. Structure emerges from stillness. Sleep is not withdrawal from reality. It is participation in a deeper cycle. I imagine ancient observers finishing their watch as dawn approached, extinguishing lamps, descending temple steps, allowing the sky to carry on without them. Knowledge did not vanish when they slept. The stars did not stop moving. Trust replaced vigilance. This trust is essential. Without it, no system could endure. You are allowed to trust now. The story does not require your supervision. The universe does not pause when you sleep. Silence continues its work. Patterns persist. Earth turns. Sky shifts. Return, if it ever matters, will not be delayed by rest. In physics, energy seeks minimum states. Systems relax toward equilibrium. Sleep is the biological expression of this principle. The mind releases potential energy accumulated through attention. Tension dissolves into baseline. This is not loss, it is conservation. Let thoughts slow like sediment settling in still water. You do not need to follow them. Watching them pass is enough. Each idea becomes softer as it drifts away from the surface. Meaning becomes ambient rather than insistent. Descent into sleep also dissolves hierarchy. There is no urgency, no priority, no demand to distinguish signal from noise. Everything fades into a uniform quiet where distinctions no longer matter. This is deeply restorative. I often think of cosmic background radiation here, the faint whisper permeating space, a reminder of origins without narrative. Sleep brings consciousness closer to this state. Awareness thins, identity loosens. You remain but lightly. The Anunnaki, the earth, the sky, the warnings and patterns all recede into this gentle hum. They are not forgotten. They are held in suspension, available but unassertive. This is how the mind protects itself from overload. As descent continues, language itself becomes less necessary. Words lose edges, sentences blur, meaning transitions into feeling. This is not confusion, it is efficiency. The brain communicates differently in rest, prioritizing restoration over explanation. You may feel a sense of falling or floating or neither. Sensations merge, boundaries soften. This is the threshold state where consciousness loosens its map of the body and space. It is safe, it is natural. There is no need to resist. Resistance creates wakefulness. Allowing descent invites sleep. Even curiosity can rest now. The universe will continue its quiet processes without your observation. Ancient texts often describe descent as return to waters, to darkness, to womb-like stillness. Modern science frames it as neurochemical shift. Both describe the same experience. Language changes. The sensation does not. Breath deepens. Heart rate slows. Muscles surrender. Thoughts drift without attachment. You are not disappearing. You are redistributing like energy spreading evenly through a system. In this state, the Anunnaki story loses its edges entirely. It becomes a tone rather than a narrative, a distant resonance that no longer demands interpretation. This is ideal. Sleep does not ask for answers, it asks for permission. If a final thought arises, let it be simple. You are not lost in space. You are part of it. This truth does not require proof tonight. It can rest as feeling. Descent completes itself without effort. You do not have to push. Gravity will do the work. The universe always does. Silence is the universe thinking. Sleep is consciousness listening without trying to understand. Let go now, traveller. Drift downward gently. Nothing needs to be carried further. The cosmos will keep watch as you rest. There is a quiet point beyond descent, beyond the act of falling asleep, where awareness thins to a soft residue rather than a sharp presence. This is where stories no longer unfold in sequence but exist as atmosphere. Meaning dissolves into tone. Thought becomes weightless. The journey does not end here. It simply stops asking to be followed. In this final space, nothing presses forward. The Anunnaki, the temples, the stars, the warnings and returns no longer stand apart as ideas. They settle into the same field as breath and heartbeat, indistinguishable from the slow machinery of rest. This is not forgetting. It is integration, the mind folding mystery into itself without resistance. I have learned over long nights with instruments and charts that the most enduring truths do not arrive when we chase them. They arrive when the chase ends. When hands loosen from the tools, when eyes close not from fatigue but from trust. The universe does not punish stillness, it responds to it. The final realization is not an answer but a posture, a way of existing beside uncertainty without tension. Ancient civilizations may rise and vanish, cosmic visitors may come and go, cycles may repeat beyond comprehension. Yet the human nervous system, small and fragile, survives, by learning when to release its grip on knowing. Here the Anunnaki narrative becomes what it may have always been meant to be. Not a command, not a warning, not a promise. But a mirror held gently toward the listener, reflecting our instinct to search for guardians, for watchers, for intelligence older than ourselves. The mirror does not judge, it only reflects. In astrophysics, the oldest light we can detect is faint stretched thin by expansion, barely distinguishable from noise. Yet it tells us where everything began. Final truths behave the same way. They whisper rather than declare. They persist quietly beneath the surface of sleep. As consciousness drifts further inward, the sense of self loosens. Identity becomes less specific. The observer dissolves into observation. This is not loss, it is relief. For a moment there is no need to carry a name, a role, a history. The universe does not require identification. I think of erosion here, not as destruction, but as patience made visible. Mountains do not resist wind forever. They become valleys without complaint. Sleep teaches the same lesson. Resistance is unnecessary. Time will shape what must remain. The final phase of this journey is not about return or prophecy. It is about scale. Human life exists between breaths and centuries between neurons and galaxies. To rest is to accept this scale without fear, to allow vastness to coexist with intimacy. In this state, the brain shifts fully into restoration. Chemical messengers soften emotional edges. Memory fragments reorganize. Threat detection quiets. The ancient systems that once watched the horizon for danger stand down. Nothing is approaching now, nothing needs to be defended. The Anunnaki, if they ever mattered in physical terms, do not matter here. What matters is the pattern beneath the story. The recurring human gesture of looking upward, of imagining that someone else once held the burden of order, then left it behind. This gesture is not foolish. It is deeply human. But sleep teaches another truth. That order does not vanish when guardians depart. Systems adapt. Life reorganizes. Intelligence evolves. The universe does not abandon its creations. It allows them to continue without supervision. This is why rest feels safe when it's complete. The body recognizes that survival does not require constant vigilance. The mind recognizes that not every question is urgent. Silence becomes supportive rather than empty. The final thought, if any remains, is gentle. Somewhere beyond our reach something ancient still moves. But it does not rush toward us. It does not demand attention. It moves according to cycles far longer than anxiety, far slower than fear. You are not required to witness it. Awareness is not an obligation. The cosmos does not measure worth by wakefulness. Stars burn whether or not they are observed. Patterns unfold regardless of belief. In the quiet of sleep, the distinction between science and myth softens. Both are attempts to map what exceeds us. Both arise from the same source, curiosity meeting limitation. Neither is diminished by rest. The final acceptance arrives without announcement. It feels like warmth in the chest, heaviness in the limbs, a gentle narrowing of focus. Thoughts no longer connect into chains. They drift alone, then fade. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. And some are not even meant to be observed continuously. They wait patiently while consciousness cycles through rest and waking through forgetting and remembering. I imagine ancient archives sealed beneath stone, not as secrets withheld, but as knowledge resting, waiting for the right conditions. Sleep is an archive too, a place where information is stored safely beyond conscious access. In this final state, the journey no longer belongs to narrative time. There is no before or after, only continuity, breath, stillness. The quiet assurance that existence does not depend on effort alone. If the Anunnaki return or never do, the universe will remain consistent in one way. It will continue to allow life moments of peace. Sleep is one of its most generous gifts. Let the remaining thoughts dissolve now. They have carried you far enough. The mind does not need to escort them further. It's all right to not understand. Silence is not absence. It is the background condition of everything that exists. Sleep traveller, the cosmos will keep watch. We've reached the edge of tonight's journey, traveller, where the last echoes of ancient tablets fade into the quiet hum of the cosmos. Together we moved through ruined temples and sealed chambers, through vanished councils and unanswered calculations, listening not for certainty but for resonance. The story does not end here, it simply grows softer. The records speak of departure, of withdrawal rather than disappearance, yet silence itself offers no final verdict. The universe continues its slow work regardless of our conclusions. Stars age, Civilizations rise and dissolve. Knowledge drifts forward, carried not by guardians alone, but by time and attention. What was left behind was not an ending, but a pause. There is humility in recognizing how small we are within these vast cycles, not insignificance, but proportion. We exist briefly, yet we are capable of wonder, of asking questions that stretch far beyond our own moment. Science measures, myth remembers. Between them lies a quiet space where meaning does not insist on resolution. Some truths don't demand answers, only presence. Like gravity they hold without speaking, like memory they persist even when unattended. Tonight it is enough to acknowledge that the past remains unfinished and the future unwritten. So let the mystery rest with you now. Close the chronicle gently. Allow the lantern light to dim. Rest well, traveller. The universe will keep watch.